it's not the cause, it's just an extract. But to explain an important thing, if you want, the influence and the relationship between philosophy and theology, philosophy and spiritual theology, which is a little deeper than just a normal theology. In the movement of things after the Second World War in Europe and abroad, United States and so forth, we had many ideas, many thoughts, and you need to understand that the way philosophy was practiced inside of the church, in the seminaries and the theological faculties, it was to a certain extent a little bit rigid, but it was good. It used St. Thomas Aquinas philosophy, so metaphysics, theory of knowledge, and so forth. Now it depends on your professor. If your professor understands what he's saying, well, then you will benefit. If he's just repeating what the book says, you will come out as idiot as he is. Sorry for the thing. Now, the form in which philosophy and theology was presented prior to Vatican II. Vatican II is 62-65. The form inherited that was there until that time, of course, was started to be challenged since after the war. We say the 60s. It's 20 years before the 60s. The way it was presented was too rigid, too square, not with the feet on the ground, with history and the development itself of the thought of Thomas Aquinas. So it generated a rejection. Thomas Aquinas in the 70s is in the bins. No discussion. I lived that time. It was still in the bins of many. I studied philosophy 87, 89. You have new philosophies, existentialism, personalism, and remember, atheism. I'm not saying that we adhere to it, but I'm saying it was very strong, especially after the Second World War, with the rise of communism, with the rise of the communist ideology, which is extremely attractive. Why? Because it's the community of Jerusalem, but with the only defect of not having the Holy Spirit, not having God. So, and the phenomenology also of Husserl. Edith Stein is a disciple of Husserl. All these philosophies have bits that are good, but the structure itself is very non-consistent, not solid enough. So if you reject because you didn't understand it, you never received it properly, the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas, the consequence is that when you will start to practice theology, you will not be able to function properly, but you are not aware of it. This is the tragic reality today, is that you rejected the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas because you never received it properly, you never understood it, you never loved it because of many reasons, human reasons, but you still entered in theology and practiced theology and read many authors after this moment and not trained in that type of philosophy. So everything is possible and the opposite. And you don't have the capacity to enter to the nitty-gritty of the reality of the grace of God. I give you one example, which is still valid today. Until that time, it was considered that Jesus had in the same time the beatific vision. He was, as we say in Latin, simul. Simul means in the same time. Viator, which means he walks. He has a human nature. He has all the aspects of human nature. Holy, but still. Simul viator et comprehensor. Comprehensor means he comprehends. He in his human nature, he is viator et comprehensor in the same time. So he has somewhere in him deep the capacity in his human nature to contemplate his own divinity or to contemplate the Father himself. We always believed in that till say, I don't know, 60s. Same business, no? Everything was thrown in the bin. Now, in theology, hardly anybody believes in that. People believe that Jesus has a human nature, and this is where it ends. It's like his human nature doesn't have this capacity to contemplate his own divinity. To the point that, and listen to me carefully, in the 70s, we have famous books that came out, which, as a title was Jesus conscious of his own divinity? So was Jesus in his human nature aware that he was God? So you see where we are going. With all the influence of psychology and exegesis and the wrong philosophies, we are not anymore able to reach this point, this junction between the soul, the existence of the spirit, which is the tip of the soul, and his divinity. So in a way, theologically, we are incapable of reaching that point. So for you, Jesus remains almost like a human being. You might even talk about Jesus' faith. Jesus has faith, which is, in Thomas Aquinas, in French, we say c'est une absurdité, c'est une idiotie. It's a silly thing to say that Jesus has faith. So very few theologians today, and consider the greatest amongst them, and I won't mention them, they're dead anyway, the belief that Jesus was simul viator et comprehensor doesn't exist anymore. So you are dealing with a poor Jesus, a limited Jesus. He had to grow. Yes, we understand that he had to grow, but this is emphasized excessively to the point that you don't have any more a God there. It's like just a human being struggling. But the root of all this is the extreme weakness of philosophy. Now, you ask me, why do we have such examples of people who are practicing spiritual theology and it is so diluted or so lukewarm? The simple reason is, in my humble view, is the disastrous, unconscious, implicit philosophy they are using. It has a direct impact. You can't imagine to which extent a wrong philosophy influences your practice in theology, and worse than everything, in spiritual theology, which is a step after. So people who rejected Thomas Aquinas, people who diluted even Thomas Aquinas, sometimes it exists, I don't want to mention names, they end up having a funny Jesus, a funny human being, and a funny reality, and faith disappears. So what is this theology? I don't know. In the name of what we can do that, I don't know. So coming back to the initial question, when then they will read John of the Cross, who is trained in the Aristotelian Thomistic philosophy and theology, his background is this. This is why he can reach the Spirit. Otherwise, you can't reach the Spirit. If philosophically you are weak, in your mind, conceptually, if you want, You can't reach the spirit. It's not possible. Unless I don't know, I don't know from which tradition you would be coming, but so that's the tragic reality in which we live. We weaken philosophy, therefore we weaken theology, therefore forget about spiritual theology. It doesn't exist, because spiritual theology is deeper, and you don't have the tools. The tools, you threw them in the bin. If you throw metaphysics in the bin, the metaphysics is one of the sections inside of philosophy. So it's nothing to do with theology. It's something different. So if you throw it in the bin, if the theory of knowledge, as we call it in philosophy, in Thomistic philosophy, is thrown in the bin, if it is not understood properly, well, then you cannot practice proper spiritual theology. You cannot reach the depth. Why? Because the tool is in the bin. So this is my personal analysis of the situation. And some people went back since then. You know, I'm old, so in the 90s, the movement is going back to Thomas Aquinas now more and more. Depends where you are, which country, and which seminary you are, and so forth. Some went back to him. I hope they had the proper professors. Because it's not enough to talk about Thomas Aquinas. You need to understand Thomas Aquinas. It's very difficult. Thomas Aquinas is not easy. It looks easy, but when you read, it's not easy. You struggle. If you don't have the philosophical background, you read the article, you don't understand the words. Why is using this word and not the other word? So that's the reality. I don't mean to be too negative, but that's the reality. It's my interpretation. And I said it even to Federico Ruiz himself. I said it. I said, I was maybe a bit too innocent at that time. And I said to him, how can we, without knowing exactly if he rejected it or not, or he's using it or not, I didn't have the analysis I have today. I was, it was what, in I don't know, maybe 1991, 1990, or something along these lines. I said to him, how can we read John of the Cross and understand it if we do not at least intellectually integrate Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas' philosophy? It's not possible. And this is what he was doing every day. So I don't know.
Did he answer?
No. But he allowed me to do. As an essay, I chose Garrigou-Lagrange big volumes, 2 volumes on spiritual theology. I read them and I gave an account of them. He corrected. I still have his notes. No, it was okay. He didn't say anything. Maybe, I don't know. I don't see the structure. Maybe he received the structure, but I don't see it in his writing. There is a way of thinking. My main professor in theology was my main reference was rather Father Lettel, but also another one, Mario Caprioli, the Carmelites in Rome. Father Lettel, philosophy of Thomas Aquinas, he knows it very well. He has a licence in philosophy. So I did with him this work I did. I have it in French if you're interested. The how in Thomas Aquinas. So it's very difficult, very complicated. How Jesus in the Passion. When Thomas Aquinas explains the Passion of the Lord in the Summa Theologica, how he says that Jesus is simul viator et comprehensor, and I did my work on that, just on that. And I remember very well during the exam on the Christology with Father Lettel, I said to him, how can we talk about contemplation if we do not acknowledge the Jesus who can contemplate his own divinity? Well, that's the end then. He said, yes, you're right. So contemplation comes from the fact that Jesus can contemplate. So if Jesus, or what is he contemplating? So if Jesus cannot contemplate, for us there is no contemplation. Forget about John of the Cross. Why are we studying John of the Cross? And this is extremely spread, extremely beyond what you can imagine. Great theologians of last century, I won't mention their name, they didn't really go there. They didn't acknowledge that they feared it. I don't know. So I don't have answers. I just can explain a little bit, and it's my explanation because I wanted to understand all my life. I wanted to understand all my life, as I don't know, since 87. I wanted to understand, but more so from 89. This is where I struggled more. I want to understand, why are we there? Why are we in this situation? Why can't we just understand the text, what the text says? This is why the title of this course is Reading and Understanding John of the Cross. I don't claim this book. I go a little bit out, but usually I never. I just want to understand what he says. Anyway, so any question? Because I will. We won't do the second lesson. It's too late now for you guys. It's late, no? We are supposed to end now. So, any questions regarding what I just said that maybe could I missed something, or something is not clear, or throw your question. I mean, you don't have to.
You say that St. Thomas Aquinas went in the bin because he was being applied too rigidly for the mentality of the time, and instead of loosening it up or making it more or better taught, why would you throw it in the bin? I mean, there's obviously something there. I mean, the man is a
as I explained, the way he was presented was very rigid. I had the manuals in my hand. I saw the old generation, what they had. I had the Latin manuals in Latin and the new manuals in French of the 50s and 60s.
Is that different from what he wrote, the manuals?
It's not hugely different, but it's, let me say so. Okay, let me explain something. From where it came. How was theology before the end of the 19th century? I don't know. It was very fragmented. Pope Leo XIII, so we are toward the end of the 1800, with an encyclical letter called Aeterni Patris. You can read it, it's beautiful. He is inviting the entire church to go back to Thomas Aquinas, to renew the studies of Thomas Aquinas and so forth. All the church, Jesuits included, because Jesuits in general, they have their own way. The ones who inherit Thomas Aquinas are the Dominicans, because he was Dominican. Thomas Aquinas is in the Middle Ages. And but the rest of the church had to comply with the desires of Pope Leo XIII. Now, to summarize it a little bit, we had a main official way of doing this renewal, and another way, souterrain. How do you say souterrain?
Superimposed.
Underneath.
Oh.
Underground.
Underground, yeah, an underground way, and then until it will emerge. So we have the official way, interpreting the desires of Pope Leo XIII to bring back Thomas Aquinas, philosophy and theology. And the big man around that, behind that, is Father Garrigou Lagrange. He was God on earth in Rome. And we had the other option. The other option, his option, Garrigou-Lagrange, was more metaphysical, which means the way he operated theology was there are truths somewhere there up in the intellect, and from this truth, everything trickles down. So you have, I don't know, the Trinity, incarnation, Christology, etc. And then you have all the other small truths that trickle down from it. So he has a very powerful mind, Garrigou-Lagrange. So he develops enormously philosophy according to Thomas Aquinas, the metaphysics and so forth. He writes a lot, and he will write also in spiritual theology. His method is rather this, metaphysical. Now you have this other current or trend, more, it was seen as dissident, but it's not dissident, which was led by Chenu, Dominican also, and Congar and others. And you have the school at leo-xiii in Belgium during the exile, which was the laboratory of this different way of understanding Thomas Aquinas. Both ways are correct, but let me explain the second way. The second way follows more the historical facts. So Chenu said, and I have his books also here, I have Garrigou-Lagrange and Chenu, so I have both options. Chenu says, Father Chenu, all of them are French, by the way, or almost all of them are French. Chenu says, we have to study Thomas Aquinas in his historical context. So we need to see the genesis of his thoughts in order to understand him. So we need to understand the history of the 11th and the 12th century and the 11th, 12th, and 13th century. There are books from Chenu just on the history of this time. And it is illuminating. It helps a lot to understand from where Thomas Aquinas comes, to understand the context, the historical context, the development of science at his time, and the discovery of nature, things that you wouldn't even imagine that existed. So it helps a lot to understand. But in the end of the day, you have to read Thomas Aquinas and present Thomas Aquinas in itself. One thing is to understand the context, and one thing, in the end of the day, you have to read him, even though the context can shed some light. So this school was more historical, if you want. The first one is metaphysical, and this one is historical. The first one, the truth is there, and the other one, the truth is here. The first option was the official option of the church until the beginning of the first sessions of Vatican II. The second option was tried in the beginning, but was banned and stopped by Rome because it was considered as deviating from the truth. So Congar suffered, Chenu suffered, de Lubac in his way also suffered. But they weren't saying something wrong, and they never said throw Thomas Aquinas in the bin, because Congar studied Thomas Aquinas, Chenu studied Thomas Aquinas, even the other way. After a while, Rome softened a little bit the prohibition of for Congar and Chenu to teach and so forth and to publish. And it starts to spread. So this is called today la nouvelle théologie. It's in French. The expression in English is in French, which is the nouvelle théologie. You have books. I have here 2 books. If you come and visit and want to sit down and read, have a coffee and read, you can come. I don't give you my books, but you can touch them and open them here, or buy them if you want. Not from me, but from Amazon. So la nouvelle théologie is made by Chenu, Congar, de Lubac, and Danielou and others, which is more historical. Of course, today when you hear that, you say, well, of course, they are right. But we live today, we don't live then. When you read one article, big article from Garrigou-Lagrange, panicking, saying, where are we going? We're losing completely the plot with this Nouvelle Theologie. This is a little bit prior, I think, to Vatican II, because I think he dies in the early 60s anyway. Now, you have a metaphysical way of doing things, which starts from truth, and everything is a reasoning. A leads to B, B leads to C, and so forth. While the others are following the truth in time, inside of time, inside of history, and its development. So it's a different way of practicing theology. It's called the history of salvation also. It's not Nouvelle Theologie, but also history of salvation, which means it will go back to the Old Testament and see how in time things develop. So the notion of history, which is very German, by the way, the notion of history is very much central in any of the works of these great men. We have to say, to a certain extent, they are great men. But the structure, my personal opinion is neither nor. You have to combine both. Because if you throw any of them, you are in danger. You are totally in danger. If you forget time and history and context, something will be lacking. If you forget the metaphysics, well, then that's the end. So I think both have to be reconciled, but they were never reconciled, by the way. Hardly. One or two great authors after, in the 70s and 80s, maybe reconciled them. What happens in the first session of Vatican II, when you start the council, you have different documents called preparation documents. You have like a draft, and you offer it to the fathers, the bishops. All the documents were shaped with the metaphysical way of doing things. Surprise, surprise, they were all rejected by the bishops. Because the language is too abstract. It's like you want a pastoral council and you are talking abstract truth. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the style, not the contents. It's the method, not the contents. And who will then emerge? All these new theologians who were banned a few years before, they will then be the leaders. Congar, Danielou, de Lubac, of course. And you have also Ratzinger, who became later Pope Benedict, and others, and some who will deviate, like Skilbix, like Hans Kung, and so forth. I don't know other names. These are some of these ones, but they deviated. Ratzinger stayed, the others stayed, and also Balthasar, Hans Urs Balthasar. So all the theology from that moment on, all these men, theologians who promoted this other way of making theology, were gods, became gods on earth, and but they had a strong background. The new generation read them, but they never read the background. So they got something that doesn't have, in my humble view, that doesn't have structure. So if you read Congar, he read Thomas Aquinas, he comes from a very traditional theological background. You know, he's a Dominican, all the history of the Dominicans is in the back. So it's fine. If he says something that looks a little bit different because it's historical, that's fine. But his faith is not shaken. But if you read only what he says and you don't take into account the invisible part of the iceberg, well, then you end up doing theology as we do it today, which is now in the 60s and 70s.
Sorry, which is how? Can you finish a sentence? The theology as we do it today, which is?
According La Nouvelle Theologie,
okay.
History of salvation. No, the old way is done, is gone, it's finished. So the only way to bring it back is to bring something that is from history. You will talk then about Thomas Aquinas, or if you are lucky enough, you can have some extraterrestrial who still can teach metaphysics. And well, this is why Father Marie-Dominique Philippe, I consider him as a hero, because he was one of the rarest, if not the rarest or the only one, who said we need to go back to Aristotle. We need to go. It was in the middle of this crisis. It was in the middle of the 70s when he said that. He said he was still teaching Thomas Aquinas, but he knew how to do it. He knew what he was talking about. I listened to different teachers, professors, explaining metaphysics of Thomas Aquinas. One knew what they were talking about, the others a little bit less. So you needed the one who see, because philosophy, if you don't see what you're talking about, if being is not seen in philosophy, then forget about it. You are just copy pasting what you read. So this is why I praise, despite all the bad things he might have done or he did, the intuition of Father Marie-Dominique Philippe, who is a founder of a new order in the church, is to heal the mind of the youngsters by teaching them first Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas philosophy. Philosophy in the novitiate, this is unseen in the history of the church. You do not teach philosophy in the novitiate. I know what I'm talking about. And he did it. This is unseen in the history of the church. Why? And they asked him, I have the interview somewhere. They asked him, why are you doing this? It's an interview, late 80s. Why do you force your novices to learn in the morning, first thing in the morning after praying, first thing in the morning, you go to the classroom and you learn philosophy. Why? He said, because the minds of the youth are damaged by all the philosophies, implicit philosophies that are surrounding us, and they don't know how to function normally, because philosophy, according to Thomas Aquinas, is simply the normal functioning of the mind. I don't say the brain, I said the mind. So when you reach this, when the professor is capable of showing you the basic fundamental movement of the mind and explain it, it's like incredible. So this is what he wanted to do, and he founded a new order based on a group of students in philosophy, not in theology, not in spiritual theology. All this came after, and it's not even his area. I don't know why he did it. It's not his area. His area is philosophy. But this is an exception in the church. This is why I still have I admire him, and the rest, what he did is none of my business, but I admire this idea. It has also its possible downfalls, but you need to understand the context. He says the youngsters, their brains are damaged. Their minds are damaged by, philosophically, we would say, a Kantian, from Kant, Immanuel Kant, a Kantian way of thinking, which permeates everything in society today, which is extremely damaging. But people are not aware. This is why it is very useful to study philosophy correctly in order to be able to decipher what is happening around you. Then suddenly you start to see it. But if you talk to somebody who never received this, they will think you're crazy. So if you want to practice theology or to learn theology, you need to go back to the healthy functioning of the mind. I'm talking mind, not brain. How the mind simply functions. If you have a flower in front of you, how the mind functions. This is what you learn in philosophy. It looks silly, but this is what you learn. How to apprehend, how to see, how to get to the core of this flower. You see, what is exterior, what is not essential, what is essential, and then the being of this flower. You see, this is just a simple example, okay? So you learn that, but you need to know very well Thomas Aquinas, his history, his books, everything. And this is only very few people in the world can do that. And did it. And now I don't know, they're all dead. So, some might still be alive, of course. The Dominicans should be carrying this tradition, some of them. So very few went. I was lucky to have philosophy offered in a place where Thomas Aquinas wasn't the bin, but by people who didn't bin him. I was in the Institut Catholique de Toulouse. Officially, the professors had binned him ages ago, but we were directed. We had courses at home in the convent, and we had courses made by a disciple of a great French philosopher who was a priest, Abbé Fontan, who was a disciple of Aimé Forest, very close to Maritain and so forth. You sit there, you don't write one word. It's impossible. You can't write. You just listen. He explains. He was very old already, and he explains and so forth. And also, I had from the Carmelites, one or two from the Carmelites who explained it, and the others don't see. It's like you haven't received it. It's difficult. It's difficult. We are not dealing with something easy. But the consequences are horrendous in theology. And I gave you one example, which is Christ. Who is Christ? They question the capacity, if he had it, Jesus, our Lord and Savior, if he was aware that he was God, that he was the Savior. I mean, Therese of the Child Jesus, at the age of 3 years old, says, I never said no to God. And we, idiots as we are, we question the fact that if Jesus, poor Lord, if Jesus was aware that he was God, Therese at the age of 3 never said no to God. I mean, a bit of common sense. We are far from these guys, far. Okay, fine. I'm not like Therese. Of course I'm not. I'm millions of years far. But if Therese is like this, why Jesus wouldn't he have more? Why Our Lady wouldn't she understand better than our stupidity? So this is what we do. We project our poor thoughts, our poor reality on the theology, plus a very damaged philosophy. Philosophy, these new different philosophies, not one philosophy, it's different philosophies, no? Existentialism, phenomenology, Kant, Heidegger, and so forth. They rather study what appears, never capable of reaching the core of the reality. Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle is different. So you stay always incapable of reaching the core. So imagine from physical things, you move on to God himself or to theology and so forth. You will never reach the core. You will only study the phenomena, which means history. So history for you, Jesus is seen from far, from outside, or from your own projection, unconsciously, your own projection, or your own psychology, your Freudian psychology that you studied. So you understand the problem. You can never reach the depth of Jesus. How can you then practice theology? That's not theology, that's simple rubbish. With all due respect, of course.
Because you have to understand what being is as such in metaphysics.
Of course, if you go back to philosophy, the being, of course, being, and your mind starts to work. You can start to see the being. But if nobody shows you that, it is a very simple operation. It's extremely simple. It's like a child attitude in front of reality. Nothing. It's like you're going back to your childhood. How do you see things? But then understanding that you are reaching something. And then you move on from that. Then you move it to theology. Then you can see Jesus and the depth of Jesus. But otherwise, you cannot enter in the depth of Jesus because you don't have the tools. The tools, you never received them. So how can you study theology? How can you study John of the Cross if you don't have these tools? There is a huge difference between John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila. Teresa of Avila cannot reach the point, the deep point. He can. So the danger with her is that you stay on the description without, and she guesses what is happening inside. But with John of the Cross, from first page, he can go inside. Why? Because he has the metaphysics, he learned it. So he can, with the grace of God, of course, with the faith, with the light of faith, he can do the operation of entering inside. She cannot, because she never learned that. It's not a guess, a game. It's an operation. It's the mind with the light of faith or a deep faith that you can reach this reality. So this explains why things are lukewarm. This explains what we did, hence the crisis, what we can call the crisis, and in my humble opinion, we're still in the crisis. To a great extent, we're still in the crisis, because how do we learn theology today? We learned it history of salvation. It's even the series is there. I have the series, the first book of the series. It's there in the back. The history of salvation is like you start. It's history. All your perspective is history. But do you ever enter in the being? You stay in history. So history becomes a prison. You cannot come out of it. You cannot enter in the human being. The human being is history also, but you don't enter in the journey of the human being. This is why I always say the history of theology moved from the metaphysical attitude, or they call it neo-Thomistical or neo-scholastic. So if you find the word neo-Thomistic or neo-scholastic, understand this is Garrigou-Lagrange and the lot. So we moved from the neo-Thomistic to the historic way of Cheneux, Congar, and so forth, history of salvation, Nouvelle Theologie, etc. Fine. So we moved from the being as a conceptual being to the being in time, hopefully. Now we need to see the being in us. You see the three plans? One plan is conceptual, metaphysics. It's good, it's nothing bad. Then it enters in time, the truth enters in time, fine, but now the truth wants to enter in us. We are the other time. We are the real time. So in my eyes, we just need one more step to do to enter in us, but without throwing in the bin, neither nor. You can't throw in the bin history, but you can't throw in the bin metaphysics. That's very dangerous. So you need to combine both and then move on to the third plan level, which is now tell me the history. This is why the first lesson in Solid Foundation,
The line of transformation.
You have the line of what? Of transformation, which is the final, the arrival. We finally arrived to the goal from a conceptual perception of the truth, nothing wrong with that, but it's abstract still, to seeing the truth in history, developing from the Old Testament and then Fathers of the Church and so forth, but it's still history. Then it enters in us. Then tell me about what the grace of God is doing in us, and tell me the history, the other history, the history of the journey. So yeah, this is my analysis, but I'm sure you have as many analyses as people. But I spent my entire life on that, on trying to understand why, what is happening. So maybe my analysis has a little bit more value, I don't know. So I hope you see why I still admire Father Marie-Dominique Philippe, and I consider that disowning him because of the sexual abuse he did have on adult people, not children. From the brothers, as a founder, if you disown totally the founder, then what is your charisma? What is your being? I mean, he is the one who told you that philosophy, that the mind is ill, and then you need to do philosophy. So you disown him. Fine, okay, disown him, and then what? This is your history. You have to accept and progress. But this is only my opinion, with all due respect to decisions made by different thoughts.
I can imagine psychologically that's quite difficult at times, you know.
Yeah, but when you know this, when you know the history, when you know what I explained,
yeah, no, absolutely.
you understand that it is very dangerous to.
No, I have to say, because I was taught by the brothers, and they are brilliant.
Yeah, of course, they are meant to be brilliant.
I got metaphysics from someone who really knows, and actually now he's been sent to further his studies in Rome. But he was like, he would take you, lift you above the clouds, you would see, and then you'd go back down. And every time he would take you do the work, like you say, you can't write it down because it's almost an experience you need to have in order to see what it is that they're telling you. And I couldn't repeat it, but if you've had, you know, it does make you see things.
Yeah, right? Of course. You see, you start to see. And this is why I say it's the inheritance of Father Marie-Dominique Philippe.
Yeah, no, I see that, yes.
The ones you had are lived in the time where nobody knew anything about him, so they drank everything. I have one or two or three of his books here, Marie-Dominique Philippe. So yeah. So this is my explanation of the story.
Complex. Complex.
Yeah, complex. Well, this is I embraced late 1800s till now. Tried to embrace the history of quick history of how things evolved. And you can I mentioned authors. You can have a look. You can see the authors. You can read. When you read the Lubac, when you read Congar, when you read Chenu, you have nothing, I would say, from inside of what Thomas Aquinas says or from the philosophy at all. Well, first of all, Lubac is Jesuit, so don't dream. But even Chenu, who is Dominican, and Thomas Aquinas is Dominican. So Chenu is Dominican and Congar is Dominican. Congar maybe sometimes, but no. You just have the historical things or a different way of doing things. The history of the dogma, the history of this, the history of that. Okay, fine. But then teach me how to think. They learned it. It is constantly there.
So they're applying it. They're applying it to something new in a way, but then
us, when we read them, we think that we become intelligent, but in fact, no. They are not giving us their own culture. They're giving us some studies they did. They received a very strong formation. They abandoned it maybe, but they continued to have it in their mind. They come from a very traditional background, extremely traditional background. But we come from a totally unrooted, nothing background. So when we read them without the philosophical and solid theology in the background, we base all our work on them. It's rubbish when you read it. It's what is this? You don't have the solidity they have. Congar, you don't have the solidity of Congar, for instance. But now, of course, in the church, you have tendencies. So you have people who will swear against Congar. These people will be very traditionalist, the old mass and so forth, Thomas Aquinas. So Congar is a heretic. Chenu is a heretic. They think time ended by the death of Garrigou-Lagrange, so to speak. So it's Thomas Aquinas, the neo-scholastic way. I learned it this way in the beginning, but I'm a little bit like them in the sense that I had the traditional formation, and then I was I was fed the other. I never find it very comfortable. But still, as I explained, we need to integrate all of them, not all that is good in each one of them. But anyway, sorry for that. I but maybe it explains a little bit for you what you can see. Well, if Jesus cannot contemplate, which is the state of theology today,
Then
no?
how are we supposed to? Yeah, no, I see.
Exactly. That's the end for us. It's like you dream. What is contemplation for us then? If for Christ contemplation is not explained, what is contemplation for us? If your master is, I don't know, this or that theologian, recent ones, no, including the best ones, and I won't mention the name out of charity. I'm very known. You know them. You know all of them. So, who is Christ? He can't contemplate. In his human nature, he doesn't have access to his divinity. Well, then go and sell potato in the market at Portobello. It's you will get more out of life. If Christ cannot contemplate, Christ doesn't know that he's God. I mean, where are we going? If the Old Testament doesn't give you what I explained, no? What doesn't give you Christ? It's just the fathers of the church with their imagination. People till today, they contact me and ask me, I'm reading this text and this is what I see. Am I losing the plot? People, not you guys, other people. Yesterday, I received an email. I read this and this is what I see. Am I losing the plot? And when you read the thing, it's like Ambrose or Origen or Augustine writing. Same level. Same level. But today, the fathers of the church are not taught. You hear about them as history. They existed, so he's born on that day, he died that day, he did this, and that, and he wrote about this book, this other book, and he was involved in this council. This is what you hear about the father of the church. But did they teach you how they read the Holy Scripture? If they did, lucky you. Or I doubt. So, Lectio Divina, can it be explained outside of the fathers of the church, outside of their experience? In my humble view, no. Anyway, I seem to be negative, but it's just
on that happy note.
On that happy note, yeah. It's just the reality.
No, and it's interesting to understand because
why do you get a lukewarm teaching? In general, I'm talking in general, without accusing any person. Why, in general, you have a lukewarm teaching? Why you don't receive the salt? Because the mind is not accessing the thing itself. The mind is weak, as Father Marie-Dominique Philippe said. No, the youngsters, their mind is. I'm very tempted to say an English word, but I can't say. It starts with an S. Their mind is. So it's not working. It's not working properly. How can you study then? How can you become a priest? How can you celebrate the Mass properly? We are. It's incredible that we still have priests and we still have things working. I don't know until when it will last. We are tempting God No, it's like Jesus, the devil comes and says, throw yourself from the temple, and the angels will come and pick you. And he's quoting a passage from the Old Testament. And Jesus says, no, don't tempt God. What is to tempt God? Is to throw ourselves from the high point, expecting things will save us. So this is what we are doing. Studies wise, we are throwing ourselves from a height and then say, okay, God will continue to save us. The Holy Spirit will work. This is tempting God. But the problem is, and this is, I will end with this beautiful note. The problem is that who is there to tell you this? The one who is teaching you took it from Congar or from the other, but they didn't take what comes before Congar. So who will tell you that it is wrong? They are in it, you know, as we say in French, no? If you live around, you smell it all the time, you are not aware anymore that you smell, no?
Shouldn't you be teaching the seminarians then?
No, I will be shot dead because I am questioning too many things. Because the professors themselves are doing what I'm doing, what I'm saying. Oh no, I would be shot dead. I should not go away. You are trouble. I don't mean to be at all any trouble. You know me. I never create trouble. It's very rare that I will say things as I'm saying right now, and I don't spread it because what's the point of spreading it? As I say, who taught you? Go back. Who is your teacher? My teacher, I can say, is this, and I thank God that they give it to me this way. But if I had different teachers, I would have never known these things. Impossible. How can I know if nobody tells me? You had the Brothers of Saint Jean. Imagine you never had the Brothers of Saint Jean. Would you have understood certain things I said today?
No.
With difficulty. You will guess it a bit maybe from far. With your cleverness, you will get it, but it's difficult to if I would have never.
Even now it's difficult.
Yeah, I know. No, in my time, we knew that only some were still teaching in the world, were still teaching Thomas Aquinas. I remember one of the brothers, older than me, a little bit older than me, like two generations older. He used to talk about a priest called Paul Toinet, a priest, a French priest. They say, yeah, he is still teaching Thomas Aquinas, but he was like a dinosaur, like an alien. Yeah, Paul Toinet still teaches. You open the books, the new books that come out, no, nothing. It's only Paul Toinet. Now, who teaches Thomas Aquinas? Even though Paul VI reminded the Dominicans in 1974 with the occurrence of anniversary of something about Thomas Aquinas, he said, you need to go back to Thomas Aquinas, etc.
Do
now,
they?
yes,
They
now it's changed. Now it's changed. You have much more. But then in the 70s, it was like.
Okay, because it's good that they're now teaching him again.
Of course, I'm sure. Of course. But I hope it's done with the necessary depth and
not just history, like histories of the fathers.
Yeah, which still is the tendency in general. No, you have huge brains amongst the Dominicans who are capable of presenting Thomas Aquinas. Don't get me wrong. You still have people studying amongst the Dominicans, but outside. No, still I can show you some lectures given in the United States.
But then wouldn't you think that then better work would come out of some Dominican theologians?
Eventually, but we would have lost 30, 40 years. Yeah, eventually, of course. Eventually things will come back, but it takes time. It takes time. When you didn't have the professor, and by pure grace of God you were able to understand certain things, you would have lost many years until you reach that point. But in the meantime, And spiritual theology, the spiritual theology state is a disaster. You had Federico Ruiz, no?
Mm-hmm.
Like him, tons like him. It's a weakness in the structure. What can I say? I don't know. Anyway, on this beautiful note,
Let's keep hope.
this is where this no, it's a responsibility. One has to. I don't know. We have to do what we have to do, and that's it. You do every day, 24 hours. Some of them you sleep, some others you eat, and the rest you have to work and do whatever you have to do, and then the rest go to. There are places where it's horrendous. I know it, and there are places where it's sound. It is sound, but you count them. In
But
France,
it,
for
you mean
instance,
it
you
being
have 2 seminars in the entire France which are along these lines.
along what? Sound lines.
The good one, yeah. Well, one in the south, I think is Toulon, and then one somewhere else. I don't remember now. So, but the tendency when you see them is rather extreme right wing, even though they are in the church and everything, but the liturgy and this and that and so forth, the old right and so forth, which is
So it's not presented very
not my cup of tea.
attractively. So it's not presented very attractively.
But at least they got the teaching, the correct teaching. Not. But as I said, again, I do not reject everything. Congar, I don't reject Congar. I don't reject Chenu. Why? Because I have the solid, I think, I have the solid background. So I digest what is good from them and add it. So, but these guys, I think, will rather put many aside and don't see, because it is the movement from the conceptual truth to truth in history is not wrong. It's correct when you think about it. It is deeply correct. When Chenu says this is the journey of Thomas Aquinas, he's not wrong. He's a human being. Thomas Aquinas, when he was young, he had this type of thought. When he became old, he changed him, and it became so. You study him even evolving. Thomas Aquinas read Aristotle. It's like today, I don't know, imagine I read Jung and I start to comment Jung. You will think I lost it. He was accused of heresy when he died, Thomas Aquinas, because he did that. No, it was the discovery of the philosophers. So he read Aristotle, he read Avicenna, he read Maimonides, he read. He had to answer to all these challenges, including other religions like Islam and so forth. He did address all these issues. So he's a human being in time. So if you just take his thoughts and make it like a structure, a metaphysical structure only, without the flesh, you will lose certain things because you won't be able to imitate him. You won't be able to continue Thomas Aquinas. You will just stay with a static image of truth. You won't be able to understand truth properly. So the descent from conceptual abstract truth to historical truth is not an error if you maintain all the elements of truth. But the problem is that some elements disappear. So I do not reject that, but I find there are limitations in the works of these great men. I find limitations. I think we should add more. We should have more.
Is in a way they complement each other.
The both tendencies, yes, of course,
Yeah.
Of course. And you have to find a way. It's not easy.
It's like then, if you only stay with theology and philosophy, nothing becomes practical. So then, you know, you have to
Depending on
come
the
down to the
philosophy of
spiritual
God.
theology in order to get the more practical side.
Also, of course, also, yeah, of course, yeah, of course. So this is the thing.
I have to go,
The
unfortunately.
tendency, huh?
I have to go,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
we have to go. So the tendency, unfortunately, went from an extreme side to another extreme, and then it's neither nor. You have to go deep. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for the explanation. Was very, very useful for me. I didn't know.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, I hope it helps. I can do a little bit more on the 70s with the sciences and the damage that, like, psychology is good, but it did have some damage also. Exegesis
Hmm.
and other sciences. Yeah, we can talk about this another time.
Wonderful.
Good night, guys.
Thank you.